Welcome. My name is Doug Lawrence, and I'm here today to talk to you about an activist's guide to a green Earth. The purpose of this video is to look at some new technology and how it can impact and make a big difference in helping us solve the climate crisis. By way of introduction, I have a multidisciplinary background in science and engineering, business, and last but not least, philosophy. My science and engineering background includes developing and designing radiation measuring devices. My business background includes some 40 years of entrepreneurial experience making high-tech instruments for industry. And my philosophical background, I specialize in axiology, which is the study of worth, and which is said to underlie both ethics and aesthetics. The intended audience for this video includes environmentalists and climate activists, and it helps if you're familiar with the environmental impact of various greenhouse gases, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, better known as the IPCC, and with respect to their latest assessment report, which is Assessment Report 6, also that you're familiar with the COP26 goals as set forth at the conference towards the end of last year, and also that you're aware of the various solutions that are on the table to help solve the climate crisis. I want to begin today by addressing key goals that we're trying to achieve. The way I want to look at it is the fact that we were really building two bridges to the future. The first being that we have to build a bridge to the future which has a satisfactory climate over the next 100 years, and that we are not overwarming and hurting ourselves. And two, we have to address the issue or build a bridge to the future when it comes to looking at civilization's energy. And we typically combine these two. The CO2 molecule really links the energy to the climate. And if we combine these two, we could say that we're killing two birds with one stone. To start out our technical discussion, I'd like to point out that in this particular case, we're going to take a systems approach, unlike anything you've seen, to solve what really is a systems problem. To begin with that, let's take a look at the kind of system that I'm talking about here. So in this diagram, down in this region, I have what I call climate remediation panels, and they interact with the radiation, both long wave and short wave, from the Earth. And that is monitored by the satellite system. So the satellite system is perfectly capable and has all the necessary sensors to see both the long wave and short wave radiation coming from these panels. In addition to that, they can see the weather conditions. This information is fed back to people who analyze the situation and then control these panels to achieve whatever goals we might want to achieve. So the big question is, what are these climate remediation panels, which is something new that you would never have heard of? So let's start out. There is an analogy on what I'm talking about with regard to solar panel farms, which have arrays. Only in this case, we're not trying to collect energy. We're trying to get rid of energy and move it to outer space. So what is a climate control panel? So a climate control panel I'm defining as a two-sided panel. So one side of it is reflective, like a mirrored surface, and the other side of it is emissive. And it's actually mounted such that you can rotate this panel. In this next slide, we have here, these panels are meant to be mounted in frames. And with the reflective side up, then we'll use that during the daytime. The emissive side is used at nighttime, and the safety is really a way to turn the thing off. So let's take a look at the reflective part. So it's perfectly well understood that the more shortwave light that the Earth reflects, the cooler it will be. And you may or may not be familiar with some of the reflectivity of various types of terrain. But the fresh snow is the highest reflector of sunlight. And then water's way down here about 0.6. And then maybe surprisingly, desert is really up here around 25%. So as you look at this picture, it's pretty obvious that the Earth's not very reflective. And so what I'm suggesting, if we take a substance like aluminum and put it on this panel, that the difference that it makes is quite enormous in the amount of light we're reflecting back. Next, I want to discuss nighttime. So at nighttime, there's infrared energy being dumped into outer space, and we want to enhance that through the use of what's called black body radiation by having a really good black body radiator on these panels. So the next effect that I want to discuss, if you have these panels, here's a side view of the panels, and obviously you can see that it's reflecting sunlight during the day up into the atmosphere. But this region underneath the panel that's subtended by the panel is cooled down. And this cooling effect can be translated horizontally through advection and help cool the Earth down. In fact, you might want to look at them as miniature shade trees. So my point is this, is that if we use these tricks that I have shown to you here, we can get a 10x improvement in efficacy over anything that anyone's ever thought of before. And that this is a solution that addresses both daytime and nighttime factors, and is the first diurnal solution. And it's the first solution that I ever have that is dynamic, in that the properties of the surface can be changed drastically by rotating them. The next thing I want to discuss with you is incremental deployment. So unlike, say, a situation where we use aerosols, we can control how much aerosols we put in, when we put them in, and where we put them in. But after we do that, we pretty much lose control of the situation. That, in fact, is not the case with these panels. So let's take a look at how many panels we might need and what their effects might be. So I have here a diagram from NOAA, which shows the buildup of greenhouse gases, CO2 and others, from 1979 up to almost the current year. And if you notice the slope of this line, we want to look at the effects. So each year we dump about 40 billion tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. Now over here on the y-axis, we have the equivalent forcing that entails, which shows in watts per meter squared what the forcing is of that given amount of CO2. So if we take the slope of this line, we see that the CO2 is such that it's increasing, increased forcing each year of about 0.036 watts per meter squared. Now why is that important, and what's the point here? If we relate this back to our COP26 goals, we see here, by way of review, that this blue line represents the current goals that are on the table to help reduce CO2 emissions and hopefully end up with less than a 1.5 degrees C increase in temperature, versus not doing anything, where we wind up with this red region up here, where of course we get quite warm. So the idea of these panels is to compensate or offset some of these effects of the CO2. So I show here a dotted line where even if I only offset 50% of the CO2 per year, that will allow us, in fact, to get to net zero And we can do it as fast as we want or as slow as we want, depending on how many panels we put in. The next thing I'd like to discuss is deployment patterns. So because of the discrete and modular nature of this solution, we have all sorts of options open to us for deployment patterns. This is very important because we have to be concerned about side effects of the panels. And one of the problems with any geoengineering or solar modification strategy has to be that we have ways to reduce side effects or not create any ill effects associated with the panels. In this particular case, we're looking at deploying them primarily in the mid latitudes, say between 40 degrees north and 40 degrees south latitude. And the idea here is if it's highly distributed, that it would have minimal impact on circulation patterns in the atmosphere in any one spot. So that would be one school of thought in distributing these panels. The other school of thought might be to put them in a particular area that we want to treat. So, for instance, on a regional basis, we could look at creating panels, farms in that area specifically to treat that area. For instance, a good example might be Phoenix, which is a heat island, where you might want to put a concentration of panels in a region like that to help alleviate the problem. I wanted to point out also water, because there's a large differential. Water is not very reflective at all. As you recall, I said 0.06 on a scale of 1. And these panels represent like a 15-fold increase in the amount of light to be reflected compared to the water. Now, when that is reflected, this area underneath the water gets cooled. And so there are perhaps, it's 1 million square miles of lake water on the Earth. And that, I'm not suggesting that we cover all these up, but out of that 1 million square miles, if we covered, say, 10,000 square miles over some period of time, that in fact could help cool down a lake. The other critical region I want to point out is really where is the hottest spots and where are some of the biggest opportunities to use these panels. And one of the answers you'll notice here, this map, which is the Global Solar Atlas, shows these very red areas, which obviously correlate to desert regions. And so one of the ways that these panels can help the most and be the most powerful is putting them in the deserts. So that's a good spot because there's not a lot of things to disturb in the desert, and it really couldn't be construed as having any negative impact on any life form. Perhaps one of the most famous concepts for the environmentalists centers around the thinking of James Lovelock and the Gaia hypothesis. Most everyone is familiar with that in this group. The idea, first off, this was formulated by Lovelock way back in the 60s when he was working with NASA on various things, including a sensor for chlorofluorocarbons. Basically, the idea or the theory is that the biosphere of the Earth helps control various atmospheric parameters associated with the Earth in such a way to optimize or help promote life in general and help it in its march towards infinite goodness. Put here also James' picture. He's still alive. I think he's about 102. And also wanted to mention the fact that Lynn Margulis was also part of this initial effort. Then along around 83, James Lovelock teamed up with Andrew Watson. And what they wanted to do was make a very simple model of how, in fact, something like this might work. And so they called it Daisy World. And the daisies, they had two types of daisies, white daisies and black daisies, and then you show here uncovered ground. And basically the model showed that through the mechanisms of various feedbacks that something simple like white and black daisies could in fact impact the Earth's temperature. Over here on the right, I wanted to show my panels because you'll notice a direct correlation. The white daisies, the black daisies, and the uncovered ground. If you look at that, you would pretty much say the only way I could describe it is it's a dead ringer for Daisy World and what James Lovelock had in mind. Today, how does Lovelock weigh in on the climate? Lovelock believes that global warming is irreversible. For him, he uses some strong language. The sustainability brigade, he calls them, are insane to think that they can save the planet by going back to nature, and that the only chance for our survival comes not from less technology but more. So I fundamentally agree with James Lovelock, and this solution is very much in line with his thinking. The next term I'd like to talk to you about is that of moral hazards. Moral hazards is a term that has been used in the climate community and has taken hold. And a lot of people have refuted that, but it still hangs around and needs to be addressed. For those not familiar with this problem or this concept, it really relates to the insurance industry. So I have shown here a house and a house burning down with the idea that if you have home insurance, that you might be more likely or be lax in letting your home burn down, or worse yet, you burn it down to get the insurance money. And that therein lies the term moral hazard, because the insurance is tempting you, I guess you could say, to do the wrong thing. If we take a look at that with the Earth and in our discussion about the climate crisis, we have the Earth here, and we have the Earth on fire here, so to speak, being heated up by the CO2. And the analogy is that the statement made is that geoengineering solutions represent a moral hazard. In other words, they tempt you to do the wrong thing. Instead of cutting back on CO2, the geoengineering solution provides you with a sort of an insurance, which would then be hazardous to the situation. So rather than launch into a big philosophical dissertation on this, there's a very simple illustration I'd like to show you concerning cigarette smoking. So we all know that when we go back in time, doctors noticed there were a lot of people getting lung cancer and emphysema, and they traced the root cause of that to cigarettes. And so our response to that as a society was to educate, inform, and try to eradicate the smoking of cigarettes. However, there was another solution in that if we picture this doctor down here with a patient on the table, that patient could be a person or the Earth. He said, hey, I want to have a cure for this lung cancer and this emphysema. And I don't think anyone would suggest that that would be morally incorrect. In fact, if you feel that that's morally wrong, you might want to stop this video right now. But if continuing on, the radiation therapy is in fact a form of cure for lung cancer. And in fact, I am recommending, as it were, radiation treatment for the Earth. And the interesting thing about this is this problem solving and this solution, this cure for the problem, is not only not morally hazardous, but it's morally wrong not to pursue a cure for lung cancer. It's morally wrong not to pursue cures for heating up due to CO2. So really the whole thing is turned upside down when you really stop to think about it. I'd like to begin to summarize this video. It's been a brief look at this solution that I'm proposing and its possible impact. I'd like to speak to the solution we have and see how that helps the environmentalist. So as you noticed back in the beginning, I said that I had a background in axiology, and axiologists like to look at the good-making properties of any solution. So I've listed out here just a few of these that I'd like to review with you. So first and foremost, the most important part of this is that the solution is safe. It does not threaten the planet or the people on it or the life forms on it. And this non-threatening aspect of it is really the number one property of this solution. Also, it's very flexible and versatile, and that's part of that, in that this solution allows us to take these panels and put them where we want, do with them as we choose, and allows us to educate ourselves on the proper use of them to minimize any hazards. Another thing that's very important for the environmentalist is to come to the table with solutions that are affordable. So in this particular case, most everyone in the climate community agrees that the geoengineering or solar radiation modification approaches are far less expensive than the other approaches that we're currently trying to take. Next point I'd like to bring out is social justice. So we do not want to have this moral problem of where we penalize developing nations by interfering with or putting them in a position that they can't pursue energy solutions for their development. Another thing I'd like to point out is there's no new inventions here. This is important. The science that's in this proposal is well known by many people, and the engineering for that matter. And there's really no new inventions needed to pursue this, which means there's really no delays. And the last point I'd like to make is very important, especially to the environmentalist. This solution has the ability to stop tipping points. So let me explain what I mean by that. To be able to stop tipping points, you need a very powerful solution. And this solution has a property that it can be scaled up. And as you scale something up and it becomes more and more powerful, you have all the more need to control that power and do what's right at a given point in time. So this solution opens the door to a solution that can stop tipping points. However, the number one problem we want to address is really for the environmental community. And I would characterize their number one problem as buy-in. So we want to help out in that regard. So this solution has been carefully crafted to be environmentally sound. We don't want to hurt the earth or the life forms on it, as I've said. And we want to solve the buy-in problems. Now, the buy-in problems at their root have a basis in people's value systems. And people have different value systems, and that's not to criticize them for that. The environmentalist is highly attuned to what I call the atmospheric realm of value, and is especially tuned in to environmental problems. That's a different realm of value, and that's the realm of value out of which they operate. One of the things that this helps too is denial. So this is a phenomena that occurs whenever you have a problem. So if you have a problem and I bring a solution to the table that's unsatisfactory to me in my value system, then I'm going to tend to deny some aspects of that problem. And so that's another issue that helps divide us that we would like to try to alleviate. I'd like to end by going back to the beginning. And we talked in the beginning about building a bridge to the future. And that bridge being twofold in nature, that we need to address civilization's energy in getting from fossil fuels to new forms of energy in the future. And we have about 100 years left on the fossil fuel before we begin to run out. But I want to reframe the whole problem here, really. What I am suggesting is that we have the green energy movement, as I show here, and obviously to reduce fossil fuels. But what I'm suggesting is that there is, in parallel with that, a different movement called, I call it the climate panel mediation movement, which puts these panels in, which helps enormously in achieving our goals with this parallel path that's very much needed. So really what the environmental, this is ultimately after, is really the Green Earth movement. The Green Earth movement is the green energy movement is just a subset of that and what we really need to do. And finally, if you like what you're seeing here today and you would like to participate or be involved in any way, or if you have any questions or comments, I urge you to contact me. My email address is doug@earth-shine.com. The website for this is www.earthshine.com. And I thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me today, and I hope that I might hear from you. Thank you.